Hello, BookTube. I mentioned that we're doing read-alongs on this channel on Sundays from now until the end of time. So bleak and barren Sundays are now a thing of the past on this channel. And what we're going to do instead is just have fun reading great books together. And right now, we're doing The Sign of Four by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the second novel of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. And then in October, we will do Sherlocktober. We're going to do a read-through of some of the very best, most entertaining Sherlock Holmes short stories in the Doyle canon. A bunch of short stories per week throughout the month of October. It's going to be a lot of fun. And there are a lot of other events that are coming up in BookTube in October, and you're going to do all of those with me as well. And if you have to quit your job or break up with your boyfriend, that's fine. Just keep in mind, eyes on the prize. Okay? But then there's the read-along for November. BookTube. And the eagle-eyed among you may have noticed some very subtle background hints as to what that read-along might be. Yes, indeed. The time has come. Let's talk about our read-along in November. In November, shipmates, we will be reading Moby Dick by Herman Melville. 33 chapters a week to read the whole of Moby Dick. Now, the reason I arrive at that number by eliminating the first two parts of Moby Dick, extracts and etymologies. The book starts with etymologies in exhaustive detail and extracts of basically Herman Melville going to many, many bookstores, many, many libraries, and basically doing a pre-internet version of a keyword search for whale or leviathan. And then providing you with dozens and dozens and dozens of quotations from literature, extracts that mention whales. Okay. All right. Fine. I have taken readers through this book many, many times, and there are two ways to do it. One is to go through the table of contents with a pencil and draw a line through the chapters that you do not need to read. The chapters that don't appear on the surface to be narratively connected to the main story of the novel Moby Dick. I have found that when you do that, you reduce the reading experience to a manageable length, and you reduce the drag on the hull that can sometimes feel. You can sometimes feel that you're awash in digressions here, and that you should, if you knew ahead of time which of those chapters to leave out, you'd have had a much better experience. That's one way of reading this. I have often done that. In fact, with students and with friends, I've sometimes taken their copy of Moby Dick at their behest and used a pencil to to run a line through the chapters they could ignore. Completely safely ignore. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to read the whole thing, including those chapters. Even so, even given that second way, which is more punishing, but I believe far more rewarding, I still say leave out the etymologies and the extracts at the beginning. Just, they are foregrounding material of a weird and archival nature. They do not have any effect on the book. They don't have any resonance with the book, no matter what Moby Dick scholar might tell you they do. They don't. They don't. The story starts at the beginning, chapter 1. So, even in this unabridged reading, as if you couldn't read the tea leaves correctly, we are going to do the second kind. We are going to read the whole of Moby Dick. Even with that unabridged reading, we're still going to leave out extracts and etymologies. You can just skip that. Later on, if you fall in love with the book, as I'm hoping to help you do, and you want to read those things, fine. You will find almost nothing. Of course, in the extracts, you'll find nothing, literally nothing of Melville. And in the etymologies, precious little either. Believe me, you're going to get enough exposition in the book proper without needing to read those things first. And I want to give my rationale for why I'm going to take you through the whole of Moby Dick instead of a reader-friendly abridgment. You will often see this book in abridgments. And it's one of the very few works, great works of Western literature where I tell people, where I think in my head, okay, I can recommend an abridged version of this book. I absolutely can. And I have many times. Because that's what the abridgment will take out. It will take out the little chapters on bits and pieces of the ship. It will take out the little chapter on different kinds of knives or different kinds of blubber. It will take out those little chapters, as informative as they are, in order to concentrate on the narrative, on Ishmael on Queequeg on the mad obsession of Captain Ahab on the hunt for the white whale. It will the abridged versions of this book always concentrate on that story, and my thinking when I recommend those has always been better to hook the reader first. Once they're hooked, they'll want the unabridged version, and that'll be fine. It'll be waiting for them. But if you give them the unabridged version and expect that to hook them, it might not. And then you've lost a reader. And you might be asking, well, then why aren't you taking such a merciful approach with us? And there are two answers to that question. First one is, you're a captive audience. You don't have a choice. Okay? And the second answer is a bit more involved. And I want to try and lay out the case for it so that you have some grounds for understanding the suffering that is about to come your way. Melville wrote a book it's about a mad chase, it's about a mad captain, it's about a tragedy in the open seas, yes. But it's also about a way of life. It's about an industry, commercial whaling. That Melville was no fool. He could easily see this industry was not going to last forever. He could easily see the technologies that would replace it and make it either a small, quaint, artisanal cottage industry, which is I think what he thought it would become, or make it non-existent, wipe it out completely. And this is analogous to whaling vessels themselves. Whaling vessels themselves expected no ports of call. They were in it for the money, and it was an extremely arduous thing that they had to do. So they had to hunt, kill, and then harvest and process the biggest animals that have ever lived on the face of the earth. And they couldn't rely on any of that hunting happening within hailing distance of friendly land or land at all. And they couldn't rely, even if they were within distance of land, they couldn't rely on having the technology in that port of call to help them with what they had to do. You can't lug around a whale carcass. You have to process the whale immediately and dump and discard the remains over the side. You can't carry around your kill. Which means that whaling vessels had to be whaling factories under sail. They had to be islands of their own, completely self-sufficient of their own. They had to have, in other words, on board, something they called a try-works. The try-works had to be on board the vessel. You couldn't contract this for some far distant port. You had to be able to capture, kill, and harvest this whale yourself, on board your own vessel, entirely self-contained. Melville knew that, and it's my belief that in writing Moby Dick the way he did, with the enormous factual digressions at the beginning, before the book starts to get underway as a full-blown drama, I believe that Melville was giving you the try-works. The unabridged version of Moby Dick includes the literary version of the try-works in order so that you have everything you need to understand an industry, because Melville could not guarantee that you would have the reading equivalent of a far distant processing plant on some island. In other words, he couldn't guarantee that whaling would still be around. He wanted his book to be completely self-sufficient like a whaler, so that if you read it in its unabridged form, you will not only know the story of this incredible adventure and this amazing dark obsession, you will also know the world that adventure took place in. And you won't need to go elsewhere. You won't need to go elsewhere for it. You will not be dependent on a foreign port of call. You will have your try-works here in this book. And I believe that's important. It's not as important as making sure that you read this book, but it's right up second to it. And not only because of that, because Melville wanted to give you not just a story, but a world, but also because, unlike the etymologies and extracts section, in the factual nodules that are lodged all throughout Moby Dick and that turn so many people away from the book, Melville's prose lives. He isn't all that present in the purely expository material that he starts off the book with, but when he's writing about the world that he's trying to give you, the world of whaling, his prose lives. And I believe that if you go into it with a slightly indulgent frame of mind and listen for that, you will see it. Several of you have guessed from my ominously growing background that November is going to be a Moby Dick read-along, and several of you have said in comments or texts or whatever, have said, "Oh no, I tried it once." and I was reading about different kinds of sheets or lines or harpoons, and it was just mind-bogglingly dull, so I stopped. I sympathize. And maybe in a different setting than a YouTube read-along, I might just walk you through the table of contents of your Moby Dick and tell you, here's what you have to read until the whole thing gets going. I sympathize. But I believe that if you are warned ahead of time, if you go into this with a broad open mind, expecting that Melville is giving you not just a story, but a world, then you will embrace those chapters the way you should. Keep in mind, that was their original intent. It's not just that Melville was thinking of imagining a far distant time like ours when only outlaw nations kill whales for any kind of commercial reason. These are beings that live for a century. They have a culture. They have a language. They love their children. They have extensive family bonds. They create soaring, cathedral complex works of art. The idea of killing them for lamp oil is as obscene now as it was in Melville's day. But it isn't just that he envisioned a time when that might be outlawed, when it might not happen at all, or when whales might be gone. It was also that he was writing, he knew perfectly well that most of his readers wouldn't know anything about, at the time, most of his readers wouldn't know anything about the workings of the whaling world. He wanted to give that world to them as well. When you think about it that way, when you think about those chapters, those of you who have not read Moby Dick will not know what I'm talking about, but the minute you start reading, you will start encountering them. Not the minute. You get a very Omu and typey, a very adventure-y style opening to the story. But once we're underway, you get little chapters and sometimes not so little chapters that will boggle your mind. Your first impulse when you get to them will be, this can't have anything to do with the story. And you're right. It doesn't have anything to do with the story, but it has everything to do with the world. And I believe that if you know that ahead of time, if you know those chapters are coming, and if you know how to read them, I have had great success with people saying, okay, well, if you hadn't warned me, if you hadn't been with me the whole way, I might have encountered a chapter on a specific kind of bolt on a board and thought, that's a little bit much for an author to ask. But having been prepared, I now see, okay, I'm learning a lot here. I'm hoping that you will be of that mind frame. Because in November, here on this channel, we're going to do a read-along of Moby Dick. It is high time. Those of you who have had this on the horizon forever, who've thought, oh my God, I know it's a revered American classic, one of the greatest novels of all time, but I just don't feel up to it. Or those of you who've tried it, or those of you who read it once, maybe in an abridged format, or even unabridged a long time ago and want to give it another try, it's long since time that we all come back to Moby Dick and read this together. So that's what we'll be doing in November. 33 chapters a week. That might sound like a lot, but keep in mind, a lot of these chapters are a couple of pages. I feel certain that when you start to do 33 chapters a week, you will find it doable. Now, if I will check in, of course, I'm not going to make you suffer alone. We will be checking in all the time. You can, of course, email me anytime you want, and I'll be checking in every week, and I'm always on Voxer and texting and email. If we get the sense, after let's say the first week, that 33 chapters a week is too many and that we need more time to do Moby Dick, that'll be one thing. But I don't think that will happen. I'm pretty sure that 33 chapters a week is easily doable for this. So that's what we're going to do. In the month of November, we're going to read Moby Dick together. And we're going to have a whole lot of fun doing it. So I wanted to make a video and explicitly warn you that there is a method behind the madness of my growing background of Moby Dick editions. And that method is, this is our next big undertaking. So we're going to enjoy the heck out of Sherlock Holmes for the month of October, and then we set sail together, shipmates. It will be great fun. Believe me, it will be. And then, those of you who are doing this for the first time, quite a few, I would imagine, you will have read Moby Dick. If you fall under its spell, you will keep reading it, as I have my whole life. I can't imagine my reading world without this book. But even if you don't fall under its spell, you will have read it. You will not have sampled. You will not have skimmed. You will have read it. And there you go. You'll be done. So find a copy of Moby Dick. Download a copy of Moby Dick. And maybe get started. Maybe prepare yourself. I would say don't get started. I would say wait and see. Moby Dick in big gusts is very enjoyable. And 33 chapters a week will not cover the 134 chapters that we have to cover. It will leave a little extra, but that's good. Because Moby Dick, when it reaches its climax, reaches the mother of all climaxes. The last 3 or 4 chapters of this book are like being caught in a whirlwind. They're incredible. And maybe we should mirror that experience by reading a little more in the last week, by getting caught up in the whirlwind of the story and finishing up all the reading that we have to do then, no matter how much it is, more than 33 chapters. So, but for now, for the first week in November, we will read the first 33 chapters of Moby Dick. So, I will see you then, shipmates. I just thought I'd give you fair warning. So I will wrap this up for now, but I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.